Good afternoon, everyone. If you could please rise for the singing of the national anthem. Thank you, everyone. So, colleagues, staff, those watching from home, things are going to be a little bit different today. Anyone watching from home, we're using a new system for the first time, a new voting system and an agenda management system. We've had an opportunity to use it at least one committee up to this point, but this will be the first time that we do it with full council. So there may be some issues arise just out of any one of us not being familiar with how the software works, and also staff are going to need a little bit of extra time likely as we move our way through the agenda. So if we could all please be patient today, that would be much appreciated. One of the changes that we'll have to do just as we work through the agenda is that we'll deal with disclosures of pecuniary interests before recognitions moving forward. It's just a requirement in the software. So I'll look for any disclosures now. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. With respect to the fourth report of the Community and Protective Services Committee on number 9, the odor bylaw, my agency, the Middlesex London Health Unit, has a role to play in the enforcement of that that bylaw as well. So declare my conflict.
And any others, colleagues? Okay, then we will move through. There are no recognitions this evening. However, I know Councillor Zafman asked me before the meeting if he could say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will, I guess not as formally recognitions on the agenda per se, but I will be recognizing someone, or two people today, both Londoners who I think we can both be quite proud of. One is named Sari Shatil, and the other is an individual named Mark Idison. Sari Shatil is a physiotherapist here in London who does some great work. And for a number of years now, she has been supporting Mark Idison, who is a Canadian Paralympic athlete who's on the Canadian curling team, who is representing us in Pyeongchang right now. And just wanted to speak briefly just a little bit about Mark, to share some of his story, because I think it's really important that we not only recognize and appreciate those who are from our city and country representing us abroad during the Olympics, which we just had, but as well during the Paralympics, because these athletes show some amazing strength and tenacity. So Mark, for any of us who is not familiar with him, was injured during a helicopter crash in 2007, which resulted in his shattered legs, pelvis, and his neck being injured in 2 places, which resulted in quadriplegia. Prior to his injury, Mark was quite an athlete who liked to compete, and that spirit was returned in about 2010 when he decided to take up curling with a dream and determination to hopefully be a Paralympic athlete representing Canada. Incredibly, in 2011, Team Canada was actually going coast to coast looking for talent, and in that competition, Mark participated, and of 28 athletes that were selected, 14 were cut Additionally, more were cut till 5, and he was one of the 5 selected that went on to become part of Team Canada, which is really incredible. And that team, which Mark was selected to, was the gold medal winner in Sochi, which was the 3rd consecutive time that the Canadian Paralympic curling team won gold, which is, I think, is a really incredible accomplishment. And I want to thank Mark for his strength and tenacity, because frankly, it takes a lot of courage and strength to do what he has done in coming back from such a tremendous injury, but showing that spirit and strength, I think, is really incredible. And want to thank Mark for being such an incredible, and Sari for supporting him. Incredible champions, not only for London, but for Canada abroad. And just wanted to take that opportunity to thank and appreciate them today.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Let's move on. As we take a look at the agenda on screen now, we'll look for any review of confidential matters to be considered in public. There are none. I'll look for a motion then to go into closed session. And so again, another change in the system is that we won't be moving and seconding on screen. We'll go back to the old system. And so I saw that that was moved by Councillor Armstrong and seconded by Councillor Salee. For folks at home, staff then put that into the minutes, and we do vote online. Councillor Zafman?
I should probably just keep standing. To you, Mr. Mayor, I have an additional reason which I provided for the clerk for us to go in camera, and if she could possibly read that out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and it is a matter pertaining to advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, reports, advice, or recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation, and directions to officers and employees of the corporation pertaining to a proposed regulation to address odor matters.
Great, thank you. Councillor Turner.
Sorry, I'm wondering if at Planning Committee, there was a question of appropriate wording for the Planning Committee reasons to go on camera, if those might be reflected in the reasons for this.
Through Mr. Mayor, the reason that I've just read does include those additional wording that's required. I did not amend the planning reasons to include that wording, as I didn't have any direction to do so.
Thank you.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. I'm going to call the question and we'll see what happens. And Councillor Salee is going to vote manually. He's a yay. Okay, so the vote is up on screen. We're voting.
If you voted, it won't show up. Councillor Van Holst? Councillor Cassidy? Closing the vote and the motion passes 13-0.
Okay. We'll be meeting in committee room 3 for anyone watching from home or here in attendance. We'll be out before 5:15. It might be right at 5:15 or it might be much earlier. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we're back in public session. It's 4:30. As we move along here, we'll get to agenda item 5. This is confirmation and signing of the minutes of the previous meeting. I'll look for a mover. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Vote manually, yea.
Councillor Slee votes yea.
Councillor Armstrong? Closing the vote. And the motion carries, I believe, 13-0.
Okay, communications and petitions. There's communication 6.1, Sister City Partnerships. Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by, I need to look over to my left, Councillor Zafman, thank you. Any discussion? Okay, we'll call the question. Okay, we'll call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Squire? Councillor Squire is voting yea manually. Yes. Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-0.
Okay, 7, motions of which notice is given. There are none. So let's move to reports. This is the 4th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I present the 4th report of the Planning and Environment Committee. I believe item number 6 to be taken as there's a technical amendment and an alternate motion from a member. Are there any other further to be pulled?
I see no hands.
Seeing none, I will put the balance of the report forward.
Okay, the entire Planning Committee report with the exception of Clause 6, moved by Councillor Turner. Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to quickly rise to recognize number 13, the property located at 220 Adelaide Street South. This is a new gym which is looking to go in there, which is really exciting for the area because frankly we are lacking in gym facilities around there as someone who lives close by. So very excited to see something like this coming into our neighborhood.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I just want to support number 11, which is the rezonings to allow for 4 new residential buildings in Argyle, and certainly we not only welcome this, but if there are any other developers out there that are interested in residential development, we certainly would encourage them to have a serious look at Argyle. We are in bad need of residential housing. There's no lots available. I think you've heard me talk about that before. Well, we don't have any apartments available, none in the foreseeable future other than these units. So certainly I want to send that message out there that we're open for business.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Other speakers? Councillor Helmer.
Just briefly to comment on number 14, these are the proposed rezoning for 644 and 646 Huron Street. This will result in either one or two mid-rise apartments being built on the site. It'll add 26 residential units in a multi-unit building, which is certainly welcome in the area. We have a need for more rental housing in particular in that area. And I wanted to encourage committee, it sounds like it will be since no one pulled it, to support both the referral to the urban design peer review panel for the site plan to make sure that some of their concerns are addressed through the site plan process, and also the H5, so we have a public site plan meeting for this property. A lot of the feedback from the residents in the area, this is an area where there are a lot of tenants, a lot of the feedback was about the specifics of the site plan and not so much the rezoning, which people were very generally supportive of. So I look forward to discussing that when it comes forward for the public site plan meeting.
Anyone else? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote?
Really?
And the motion passes 13-0.
Thank you, Your Worship. So next is on, with respect to Clause 6, there's an amendment to the amendment sheet you should all have. The reason for the amendment is stated at the bottom of the first page, which is to change the full force and effective date, which was misstated as March 1st, and has been changed to from the date of passing of this bylaw, so today. So I put that on the floor.
Thank you.
And I think to answer Councillor Cassidy's question before she does that, this is the amendment. With respect to that, it doesn't pass the motion yet. The opportunity to bring that forward will come after this.
Okay, if there are no speakers on the amendment, we'll call the question on the amendment only. Need a quick seconder on the amendment, please. Councillor Morgan, thank you.
Councillor Hopkins and Councillor Ridley. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 13-0.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'll put Clause 6 in its entirety on the floor. And with Councillor Cassidy, I believe, wants to bring a motion forward to that effect.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you to the chair. I'm just looking at item A of Part A of Clause 6. And so will we just deal with A separately?
Yeah, I'm advised by the clerk that you have an alternative idea, and so we'll deal with A. But because it's contrary, and this is coming through committee, we'll have to defeat that for you to put your motion on the floor. Okay.
So I'll speak to Clause A, and if the recommendation coming from committee is defeated, then I will put an amendment on the floor. So I'll just speak to the whole thing right now. So people will probably recall that this has come before council already. And it's a subdivision in Ward 5 on Sunningdale Road. It's been a long process. Staff have done a lot of work with the proponent on this, through you, your worship, I'd like to thank staff for all the work that's been done. There's been a lot of back and forth, and this is the property, I've been warned not to say the word barns, but it is the property with the heritage barns that are part of an overall mixed-use subdivision. So the last time this came before council, we were dealing with the 4 commercial blocks, and there was a prohibition on any residential development on the ground floor of these 4 commercial blocks. Staff asked us to refer it back at the last council meeting, and we did that. And so what came before committee a couple of weeks ago was the recognition that there could be some residential allowed on only block 46. So what I would like to propose is that we also allow this concession on block 47. If you look throughout the city, wherever we have this business district commercial zoning, it's written right in the zoning bylaw that residential is allowed on the ground floor of these kinds of mixed-use buildings, only at the rear of the building. And this prohibition is only unique to this subdivision. And we are conceding on block 46, and it makes sense to allow it on block 47 as well. There's some symmetry there. The 2 blocks are right across the street from each other. And the block 47 in question actually faces a neighborhood park. And so it does make sense as well to have residential facing this neighborhood park rather than commercial or office space. Another reason for allowing the residential at the rear of this block is there is a requirement in the BDC zoning bylaw that the entrance to this kind of commercial unit is only off the Main Street corridor. This block is on a corner, so the side of the building is on a neighborhood street where they could not have a storefront, they could not have a main entrance there. They would have to either, if they were to rent out this unit, the entrance would have to be through the parking lot or create some sort of long corridor because of the shape of the building. The long side is along the neighborhood street and the short side is on the main street. So there is some question as to the marketability of these kinds of units if they are not allowed to have a main entrance off the neighborhood street. The other thing is if the proponent believes that this would not be marketable office space or retail space, they would actually make the building smaller and just have the main building that would be facing the main street and then empty space at the back, which would be an increase in surface parking. So what we would be doing is encouraging an increase in surface parking and reducing the density of the residential development on this site. So I just think it allows the proponent some flexibility. I think it shows us a certain amount of reasonableness from this council to allow the residential development only on this block, in addition to block 46. And the other 2 blocks, I believe, are 48 and 49. The prohibition would remain on those 2 blocks. So it's a small concession. I believe we should do this and I believe staff are not. I've had discussions with staff and they are not opposed to this. This was just the recommendation that came through committee. So that's why I would like to see Part A of Clause 6 defeated tonight so that I can put an amendment through that will allow some residential development behind the commercial development on Block 47.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kotsovas has indicated he'd like to speak, and so I'll invite you to do that, and then Deputy Mayor Huber, I saw you up next.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just going to indicate that I have spoken to the consultant for the site and staff as well. So we are, as Councillor Cassidy indicated, we're not opposed to the amendment for this 1 block. So I just leave it to you.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor Hubert, anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be seconding my colleague's motion. As I looked at this development, I'm not going to reiterate all the things. I think she's done a really good job of measuring out the various elements that are, a part of this development. And as I looked at it, I looked at the design of it, and this is the first step, really. This proposal will still have to be evaluated inch by inch, meter by meter, by site design and urban development and our urban design people. So I think for us, one of the things that we need to use is what's the measure by which we evaluate these things? Is it good urban design? I think the councillor points out rightly that, a BDC 210, that the primary entrance for individual commercial retail office tenants shall be oriented to a primary collector, and this would be sending it towards a park, sending it towards a local. I think the other thing is this provides symmetry so that you have the same look on one side of the street as on the other side of the street. And I think that's a healthy and attractive thing because we're trying to build a community here. The other thing is I'm really loath to see anything that would result in a ruler that would create fewer units, a lower density of development. So I want to congratulate staff for negotiating this one through. I know it's been challenging, but I also am looking forward to having a really good development. I think with the Heritage Barns, it's unique with the park in the center. So I will be voting against the resolution, and then I will be seconding my colleague's motion when she has that opportunity. I hope council will give her that.
Any other speakers? Councillor Helmer.
Well, we've talked about this one a couple of times, and we referred it back so our staff could look at this very specific issue, and they came back with the same recommendation for block 47 as they had the first time. Now they seem open to something different, which I'm sure is helpful for the people who want that to happen. I don't agree with it. If you want to build residential on top of these BDC blocks, all you have to do is put commercial on the main floor. You can build the residential on top of it. It just has to be commercial at the ground level, which is what you want in a BDC zone, and it's what you want, especially in a BDC zone that is on the corner. You want it to look like here's commercial on both sides of the ground level, and there's residential on top. It's a nice mixed-use building. Sure, there are limitations around accesses into the specific unit where you've got the primary entrance, and perhaps that could have been the relief that was sought by the applicant to say, well, I don't want to have the entrances just off this one road. I'd like to have them off the other road. I might be willing to support that. The idea that we're just going to build a smaller building because we don't want to build the commercial is not marketable, I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. If you think there's a market for the residential buildings, the units, and you want to put them in this building, having a small amount of commercial on the ground floor, very reasonable thing to do. We already had changed one of the blocks, which I think was a reasonable compromise. That's a bigger block where I think this is supported. I think you can support that. In a lot of the BDC zones, the rear is really the rear. It's not the side. And so, for example, in my ward, we have a BDC zone where there is commercial on the front, there's residential on top of that, and in the rear, there is just residential on the ground floor. That's because it's not on the main street. It's behind the main street. This one is on the corner. And I think when you look at the rear, it's really the side, which is also a front onto the street. So I don't agree with the whole thing. It's a way of minimizing the commercial area in a mixed-use building. There's no guarantee that you have to build residential on top of the commercial. You could end up with a small, low-rise commercial building and a bunch of residential beside it. And that's not what we're trying to do with a BDC zone. It's not what we're trying to do in that particular block. So I think the zoning for it is actually quite appropriate, especially given the configuration of the lot.
Other speakers, please. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm going to support the ward councillor on this one. Of course, it's going to be, as the Deputy Mayor pointed out, similar to the other block. I think we've done a lot of work on this, and if this is just a little piece that gets us to an actual development, I'd like to move forward with it. We are creating some real hoops for the business in terms of the marketability. I think we need to trust our developers to know what they can and cannot sell, and having to have a unit without an entrance. I'm reminded of the, remember the old arcade mall that we had, was this strange place you would walk through. There was little businesses in there, but they would disappear like it was the Bermuda Triangle of proprietorships. And I think we'll have a similar thing like that. It would be very awkward and could be for businesses, and we're better off just letting this go forward as it is. So I hope we can have this one move forward, and it'll be as symmetrical. And I think across from a playground, it's appropriate to see some residences. So that's how I'll be voting.
Thank you. Other speakers? And I'll go to the chair, to Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Councillor Helmer discussed, this has been back and forth a few times between our committee and staff and the applicant. The rationale behind business district commercial, as Councillor Cassidy points out, it is generally allowed to have that residential in the back. As Councillor Helmer pointed out, that is often the case. The rationale behind the assignment of the business district commercial recognizes main streets. Main streets that are typically already in existence. This is a zoning that came to be after the development of storefront shops with residential on top and perhaps some residential behind. This is not new builds. So in this circumstance, it's a new build. And we're using the business district commercial zoning to apply to a new build area. So of course, in this circumstance, it's completely appropriate to dictate the terms under which that is used. Really, the BDC is kind of reflects an old state. And when we're using it in a new state, we say, okay, what's the most appropriate way to use it in this circumstance? If you take a look on page 10 of the report, you'll see it's kind of hard to delineate, but there's two business district commercials just north of Sunningdale Road, kind of in the center of the map there. The one on the western side is almost twice the width of the one on the eastern side. The question is the question of the parcel on the eastern side, and that's what Councillor Cassidy is bringing forward here. The rationale given in our discussions at committee was that the lot wasn't wide enough. It didn't have the depth coming onto that secondary street to be able to support what was being asked for and what we conceded on the western lot. They're different in character, they're different in property, so the question of symmetry doesn't enter here because they are not the same. It's about half the size. So that depth doesn't necessarily support having rear-lotted residential on the ground floor of these. The entrance, this is the entrance way into a fairly key development. And this is the intent of having a business development district commercial so that there's kind of a mainstreaming effect as you enter into a neighborhood. And there's kind of smart growth principles put into play, talking about mixed use residential. So having that main street, main level commercial with residential on top is how we affect that in the entranceway into the neighborhood. Beyond that, it's a different thing. So to Councillor Van Holst's points, no, there will still be street level commercial regardless of what's decided here. In either circumstance, it's not a question of whether it's ground floor residential right up to the top or not. There is in this zoning, what's being proposed by Councillor Cassidy is that on the secondary street along that section, instead of commercial, it would be residential that would be allowed there. There just wasn't really the depth. And I think we've made a fair amount of concessions. It's gone back and forth a few times. I would urge you to support the recommendation that came from committee. When an amendment was put forward, it did not have a seconder at committee. It's being brought forward here at this time.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Squire.
I wasn't going to speak, but for once I did listen to everything that was said here, and I like the approach. I usually make up my mind early, but here I was absolutely perplexed here. There was a lot of use of the word we. This is what we want to do. This is what we want. I don't know who the we is. I had a chance to meet with the person who's building these buildings, and it seems to me that the approach he was bringing forward was a common sense approach that suits the lot. And really makes sense. And that's the we I'm interested in. I'm interested in the we that is the public that's going to use that area, the we that is the people who are putting their money forward and their expertise forward to develop this property. And in those circumstances, I'm very supportive of what they brought forward. And I think this overly technical approach that I quite frankly found difficult to follow is not the approach that Londoners want. So I'm going to be supportive of Councillor Cassidy.
Other speakers? Okay, so just procedurally, we'll need to look for a seconder for the entire motion as amended, and then we'll pull Part A out to deal with this. So Councillor Turner has moved the overall motion. I need a seconder. Councillor Helmer? Thank you. Okay, now what we can do is we can deal with A.
Clarification.
Yeah. So
So I just want to get the procedure right, because initially we were told we needed to vote against what was on the floor. Are we still on that? Okay, just want to make sure we don't go the wrong way.
Okay, so yeah, we just had to set up the motion first, and so it's been moved and seconded, and now what we're going to do is deal with A separately. And just as Deputy Mayor Huber pointed out, if you want to support the amendment that Councillor Cassidy is suggesting, this would need to be defeated, just this portion. Any speakers? Okay, let's open that vote, please. Okay, this is Part A only.
Sorry, closing the vote and the motion fails 4-9.
Councillor Cassidy?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the clerks have an amended bylaw that just changes Clause A to remove the special provision just for Block 47.
Okay, the clerk advises me that's on our desk.
Second that.
And it's been moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Other speakers? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd urge defeating this. Obviously, I voted in favor of the other one, but more so because we don't have any information on the implications of this policy change. I think it would be appropriate for us to refer it back and get the appropriate information from staff to move forward on it. I think we've heard information contrary to the direction that's being put here, and I'd like to know what that impact would be.
Okay, let's get that question answered, please. Or you want that answered by way of referral, just so we're clear.
I would seek the most appropriate avenue for that. I'm in your hands, Your Worship.
Okay.
If I may, to help things, through Your Worship, I guess to Mr. Kotsifis, we had discussed this at length during committee. Staff had given advice that that this was not the direction in which to go in. It sounds like there's been a change in opinion. I guess I'd like to seek what the impact of the amendment as proposed might be on the development itself, and what the recommendation of staff would be in that circumstance.
Mr. Kotsifis, are you prepared to answer that question today?
Through Your Worship, I can give it a shot. I think, you know, I used my words carefully. We were not opposed to the change. It's not that, I think our staff have been fairly consistent about some of the concerns with respect to the zoning on the property. However, notwithstanding that, there is sufficient, and this has been brought up tonight as well, there is sufficient policy in effect that can assure us that the Main Street commercial will be we will be seeking to have that in place. So although there is an impact on, or a concern that was there present for the kind of the erosion of the policies, I think there is sufficient policy, given our discussions with our planners, that will protect our interest in the long term.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and as such, I'm fine not making the referral back at this point to allow it to stand. I still encourage defeating the motion.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Ridley, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't support this at planning. I do appreciate the ward councillor's work and effort and that she's doing on behalf of the application. I'm a little confused here. One of the reasons I didn't support this at planning was the depth, not having the room in block 47 here. And at that time, my thoughts were that staff were not supporting that. I understand we're sort of taking a different view of this. I just don't like the way this is unfolding here. I am still not convinced that we need to do this. I would urge everyone really to defeat this. We made a decision at planning based on the information, based on the recommendation. It was a lengthy recommendation. There's a lot of holding provisions. And I feel now we're going through a change that sort of changing policy at council. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about it. So I would urge you not to support this.
Other speakers? Deputy Mayor Hubert, anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think through you to Mr. Costas, the next steps for this application, should the zoning be in place, would be what?
Sorry, once, hopefully, if we get some resolution this evening, this application can proceed. It's then in the hands on the developer, and they can actually start proceeding with registration and developing the parcel.
But Mr. Costas, it would come back for site plan, where some of these concerns around access, some of the depths, some of the siting of the buildings, some of the massing would be dealt with. It would also go to urban design, I would assume, as well. So council, and given that there's a number of holding provisions, council has enough security and safety to ensure that what we hope will happen in an appropriate way.
Through His Worship, yes. When you're getting into actually the process and the longevity of the process, there's many hoops to go through, and a lot of H's on these parcels. So absolutely, there'll be further approvals and likely further information to council as these progress.
Other speakers? There are none. Let's call the question. We're voting. We're voting on A only.
Closing the vote. And the motion carries 9-4.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's the fourth report. Is there more?
We'll
We need to do more.
Yeah.
Okay, as amended.
Great. Any speakers on the motion as amended? Councillor Helmer?
I otherwise supported the entire thing, and now, because I don't think this is reasonable, I'm going to vote against the whole thing.
Okay, and just so we're clear, that's been moved by Councillor Turner and seconded by Councillor Cassidy. Other speakers? There are none. I'll call the question. Voting.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote. And the motion carries 11-2.
Now, Chair, thank you very much. Excellent. Let's move on to the fourth report of Community and Protective Services.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to pull number 9. One of my colleagues has a conflict on that, and also I want to pull it.
Speakers to the entire report with the exception of 9. There are none, so we'll look for that to come up on, whoa, that was a scary moment. And so moved by Councillor Cassidy, just looking for a seconder, and then we'll start a speakers list. Seconded by Councillor Zaid. Oh, pardon me, we don't need a seconder. So I'll go to Councillor Cassidy.
I just wanted to say that the items from this committee were some really important and good work going on in the City of London, especially from Ms. Sandra Daters-Beer's portfolio and from Ms. Lynn Livingston's portfolio. The work that's been done around the homeless prevention system and the data management or information system around homelessness is really important and good work. And there wasn't a whole lot of discussion at committee. People recognized the importance of what was coming through, and there was nothing really to debate. So I didn't want the public to think that because there wasn't a lot of discussion that we didn't value that work, and I didn't want staff to think that either. It's very good work, and a lot of progress is being made on these really important issues in London.
Thank you very much for that. Other speakers? Councillor Helmer.
Just briefly to the social housing apartment retrofit funding. Certainly glad to see that there's $3.3 million coming to the City of London through that provincial program. I certainly can think of some high-rise social housing buildings in the city, one of them in my ward, where I hope that we can find some projects that would fit into those eligibility criteria. I know that it's reinvesting the proceeds for some of the greenhouse gas emission programs that the province has implemented, and I think it's appropriate to put that funding back into social housing. As you know, we've got a pretty significant repair maintenance backlog in some of those buildings, and being able to deal with some of that equipment upgrading and improvements to those buildings, I think will be most welcome.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I'm trying to find an item that I could couch this in, and I failed miserably, but I do want to recognize that on Saturday afternoon, our neighborhood strategy came forward. There was, I think, about 15 staff supporting about 100 people from the community. And it's really exciting to see something that started now 10 years ago, really kind of onto its third iteration. And the engagement was really excellent. The response was very positive, and I think the way it's rolling out and the way it's shaping our community is outstanding, because it's focused not just on places as we've previously defined neighborhoods, but it's really looking at how people live in those neighborhoods and make them come alive. So I couldn't tie it to an item, but I thought it was worthy of recognition.
Any other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. This is on all clauses in the fourth report of Community Protective Services with the exception of 9. We're voting.
Councillor Ridley? Closing the vote. Wait for it. And the motion passes 13-0.
Thank you, Your Worship. So for item number 9 from this report, the committee passed what had been the staff recommendation at the time, but I've since had discussion with staff, and I know that they are very engaged with the community on an ongoing basis, and they're also engaged in conversations with the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So they will be coming back to us with a draft bylaw at some point in the future. So for now, I think I would like to move item number 9. I would like to refer it back to staff.
Councillor Zafman. Can I just ask before we enter into debate, are you willing to second the referral? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was going to be my first statement, so happy to second this. I've had a number of individuals from the community, but also some of the facilities or organizations that are being considered in this bylaw who have reached out since then, feeling that this may be somewhat prescriptive, and I think having a chance for our staff to take another look at this will be quite beneficial, and very much appreciate people like Mr. Tipping, who's here tonight, coming out and sharing their feedback, because without people like him in the community, we wouldn't be here in the first place, and I want to make sure that we get this right and not just simply take action right away. We take some time to consider this and make sure we do a little better here. So thanks for that, Councillor Cassidy, for the referral.
Other speakers? Councillor Helmer.
If we were to refer this, when do we expect it would be coming back?
Mr. Kotsifas.
Through your worship, it would likely be a few months, just to give us some time to work with the Ministry of Environment. We need to consult with the industry as well as the area residents. I think there's a bit of work that we need to do, and so it'll probably be a couple months for us to report back.
I wonder, Mr. Kotsfis, and forgive me for being a bit persistent, but when you say a few months, what do you mean?
Late June, through your worship.
Okay. I think I'll support the referral. My hesitation, colleagues, is that we dealt with this about 11 months ago and started a process where first we thought we were going to support the provincial enforcement, and now we're dealing with the public nuisance bylaws, an alternative approach to that. It's taken quite some time, and I'm sure everyone recalls the public participation meeting we had and the kind of urgency that residents were communicating at that time. So I want to make sure if it's a referral that it's not going to be like September, or, like something really far in the future. And as long as it's going to be the end of June, I think I can support the referral.
Other speakers? There are none. So, Councillor Zafman, question?
If I may, just a point of clarification. So if with the referral being potentially delayed, the report until that certain time, will we still be proceeding with a PPM in April?
Through your worship, no. If everything is referred, there won't be any PPM. We'll come back to you with a report in June on a proposed course of action. In the interim, there is a lot of good things that are being undertaken by Jay Stanford and his group, things that we previously spoke about and approved in a earlier report. So it's not lost. This is just purely about the nuisance bylaw that we're talking about here.
Other speakers? Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to our staff. I'm sure that the companies that are being the subject of the complaints are working on this too. Have we seen any abatement or changes in the issue since we first brought this up? Have we seen have there been any improvements?
Through you, Your Worship, in dialogue with the Ministry of Environment staff, we've actually seen a noticeable improvement in the data related to complaints for both facilities that are part of the consideration here tonight. So we are encouraged with what is occurring in the community. A recent open house was held by one of the companies, Orga World, and a recent public liaison committee was held where the tone was a difficult tone, but we also think there is some understanding from the community that both companies are making progress with respect to odor issues.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This course is difficult because odors are detectable in the parts per billion at times. Not when you have a cold like me, but it does happen. So I understand there's challenges with this chemistry, but I hope we can work out something great for them by sending this back. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote. And the motion carries 12 with 1 recuse.
Okay, thank you. Let's move then to the 5th report of the Corporate Services Committee. We'll hand things over to the chair. We're on Corporate Services, right?
I haven't heard of anything being pulled, so I'll put the whole report.
Okay, and Councillor Armstrong, did you want something pulled? 2? Anything else? Okay, so over to you, Chair.
Okay, I'll put everything except 2.
Councillor Van Holst, did you want to speak to one of the clauses?
Yes, I did. I'd like to speak to number 5, which is the Infrastructures Canada Smart City Challenge. So this is a potential $10 million prize for Londoners if we can come up with a really smart proposal. So I'm really excited about this. I hope we can come up with something great. It looks like we're going out to the public for ideas. I know that I have some of my own. When I was at a Smart Cities conference earlier this term, Philadelphia had something great. They spent about $900,000 on 25 interactive kiosks just to keep their citizens aware. You could simply find out what was going on, and I think that is an important thing for London, for us to know what's going on. Each of the applications has to have a little strategy or maybe a kitschy statement to say what we're doing, but that might be a good one. I would like to see that kind of thing, as well as put out some digital playbills around the city, particularly downtown and some of the main streets. So we've got some video where you can see what's happening, because a lot of things go on in London, and it's easy to walk around and not know what they are, which isn't very smart. So this would bring some of those possibilities, similar to the billboards. We can send city messaging out on those, show what's happening in terms of the arts, also raise some money to cover the project with advertising revenues, which is another smart thing to do. Of course, we're a test market city, and we've never really taken advantage of the fact that that's the case, and this kind of strategy would allow us to do that. So tying in our signscape and taking control of that, I think has really, really exciting possibilities for London to do some smart things. We can do a lot of branding in that regard, and some pretty impressive welcomes to events like the Junos. So we were to put this in, I think it'd be great. We can tie it into the advertising that we're planning to have on our BRT bus shelters. So so money for that with the 10 million, and I also see possibilities for digital signage at our gateways, so people can know what's happening, what's going on here, and we can celebrate London. And I really want us to win this one, and for London to look smart.
Other speakers, I have Councillor Morgan. Anyone else?
Yes, the matter I wanted to speak to is the same one that Councillor Van Holst just mentioned, and what I will say is, I think our Director of Community and Economic Innovation and her team have put together a very smart approach to the application process. When you look at the terms under which the application will be judged, the process is really designed to make sure that we tick off the boxes in the proper way and build an application that engages the community and will be something that the community can get behind. So I think the process is highly appropriate. At committee and here at council tonight, we are going to authorize the Director of Community and Economic Innovation to take all the necessary steps to complete the application, which I think, given the tight timeline, is a very appropriate thing for council to do. I wonder if I could ask a question of our staff to find out after approval tonight at council, how quickly will we see the implementation of gathering the information from the public on this matter?
Welcome, Ms. Wilcox.
Thank you, through your worship. The application, as is stated in the report, closes on April 24th. So in terms of turning that around, I would say early to mid-May, we could turn around and bring that application back. It would be a process of updating on what took place to develop the application and the application itself.
And it's just a clarification, you outline going out, engaging the public, starting to do that work. My question was, you'll have the authorization to go ahead tonight. How quickly will the work start? Are we talking, tomorrow?
Through your worship, yes, actually the process kicks off tomorrow. So council will see a package that will be circulated to them through the clerk that outlines the process itself. So that'll be kicking off our broad engagement around selecting an area of focus or a theme. And then we'll have a series of ideation sessions leading up to the April 24th deadline for the application.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to see we're going to get started as soon as we possibly can. And again, kudos on a great plan. And I think the community engagement on this will be pretty exciting. And I can't wait to see what the idea is that we come up with and submit.
Great, thank you. Any other speakers? Deputy Mayor Hubert, anyone else?
Thank you. I actually, Councillor Van Holst raised a number of interesting ideas that if we get the hotel tax through might be good sources for the capital side of that in terms of promoting both domestic and tourists coming in from outside of the city. But I want to speak to number 7, and I will support it tonight, but I have some concerns around sister city partnerships. I'm looking forward to the information coming back. We've had a sister city in China for many, many years, and I struggle to measure the impact. I struggle to see what it is producing for the City of London, and I've met folks from that city, and so I'd like to hear, as part of the report, Mr. Mayor, from your office, and also from LEDC, in terms of what they perceive the benefit to be. I think there's tremendous benefit from cultural exchanges, and certainly the gentleman from Huron College that wrote to us, I think that's admirable. I think it's exciting. I think it's important for students to be engaged in the world. But I'm not sure what the sister city designation really produces and how we evaluate that. So that's what I'd like to look at when we come forward.
Other speakers? Okay, let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 13-0.
I'll put item number 2 on the floor. This is the update on the 2018 municipal election. That includes a lot of information about the various changes that are happening for the election, including ranked choice of voting, the addition of additional polling locations so that the lines are shorter and it's a little easier to vote. Let's look to see if there are any questions.
Councillor Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Well, I'm sure that the lines will be shorter. Because my thought would be a lot of people, because of ranked ballot introducing this new system, and you know, a lot of people may decide not to come out and vote because they don't understand it. And that's, of course, my opinion. Your Worship, my question is, first of all, we've had some sessions about ranked ballots out there to help the public understand. And I'm just wondering, I noticed there was a couple people who came to London from the United States. I don't know what their interest in ranked ballots and how we vote in London, Ontario, Canada, these Americans that have come up here. So I'm not really sure because I wasn't able to make these sessions, but were they involved in the sessions in any way? They weren't. Okay, I just wondered whether they were. The second thing that I really didn't understand, and perhaps the clerk can sort of help me out with this, is originally I thought the amount that was forecasted we would be spending, and I'm just rounding it off, was around, it would cost us $200,000 or $300,000. And it seemed to me that now it's upwards around 600,000. And so I just wanted, again, just round numbers. Is that correct?
We'll go to Ms. Saunders to get an answer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure about where the $600,000 figure has come from. We have indicated this report is related to the technology, related to the ranked ballot. So the additional funding would be around 41,000. I don't have the number right in front of me, for the technology component of it. There are some additional expenses related to the election overall, whether it was a ranked ballot or a first past the post, related to population increases, related to additional tabulators that we're going to be using as a result of additional polls. Those do not relate directly to ranked ballots. Those are, we would have done that in any event, regardless of the type of election we're running.
I'm just trying to get my head around, this sounds very affordable. And earlier on, and I believe I may have sent the information out, I had our researchers have a look at some of the other cities that looked at ranked ballots and declined it. Ottawa, I think, Hamilton, and so on. In many of those cities, their reports forecasted that for them to implement ranked ballots, generally was, some of the numbers was around $1 million. Yet I'm seeing numbers, and maybe I'm not quite understanding what the total is, or is there other component here? But are we talking it's only going to cost $41,000 in total to implement the ranked ballot? Or like, what is it really going to cost us? Because I don't understand where all these other cities came up with, you know, $1 million, and there was a number of them, and that's why they didn't even entertain looking at ranked ballots. So can the clerk just sort of give me sort of an understanding of what's going on so that later on we're not surprised?
Councillor, if I could summarize your question, I think you're asking how much is introducing ranked ballots into this process increasing the cost of running an election by? Okay. Clerk Saunders? Mr. Coxhead?
No, Sarah.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry, I didn't see you back there. Over to you.
So right now, with respect to reporting out on the cost with ranked ballots, we only reported out based on the new contract with this vendor. And we summarized that to $41,400. We had to pay an extra $12,000 for a ranked ballot license with their software. We had to pay an extra $12,500 for additional ballots due to ranked balloting, an additional $16,900 for an extra 13 vote tabulators to accommodate more polling locations, to alleviate the stress or long lineups that might occur. I think what you're referring to with the additional cost with other cities, namely Mississauga reported out a large increase because they own their tabulators. The tabulators that they own need to be retrofitted to accommodate ranked ballots. The tabulators that we are securing we have always leased them since 2010, and we can lease the newest technology, and they can accommodate ranked ballots with that additional license for the software component, and that's going to cost an additional $12,000.
Boy, I wish they had that information in those other municipalities, because maybe they would have looked at this differently if cost was an issue. So this sounds much more affordable than what others looked at. So maybe it's too late for them. But the other thing is, Your Worship, obviously there were two, I know we're in town, two people from the U.S. who were here giving their opinions, and so that was my concern, that somehow they had an interest in seeing London, pursue this, and I'm not sure who paid them to be here or if they were even paid, but that's why I wanted to ask that question, just to make sure we weren't involved directly or indirectly in them being here financially.
Okay, the report that is before us doesn't deal with anything like that, but you've asked an important question, and I think it requires an answer. The answer is no, but I'd like you to get that answer from the clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship, for giving me the opportunity to speak to that, because there's a lot of misinformation out in the community as with respect to the election staff involvement. We had no involvement in that event. We have no involvement with this group whatsoever. We are working independently and neutrally as we are required to under legislation. So we've had nothing to do with that group whatsoever. We have, however, reached out to municipalities in the U.S. directly to with their staff to seek some advice and guidance on running a ranked ballot election, because they have run those type of elections before. So that's the difference.
We're at about 7 minutes. I gave some allowances there because there were answers provided, but you'll need to have an extension at this point if you'd like an extension.
Wouldn't mind asking one more question,
You know what? I'll allow it if you can just please ask your question.
I just want to understand how the clerk, there may be groups out there that want to have meetings to tell people how to rank ballot vote, and I want to know how we're going to deal with that staff-wise, and are we going to discourage that so that it's only coming from you?
You, Mr. Mayor, we are out in the community offering whoever will take us to talk to them about ranked ballots. We are communicating that the information on how the legislation works and how the election will be administered needs to be asked of the clerk's office, not of outside organizations. So whenever we have an opportunity where we see there's some information about a group that is indicating that they're out talking about ranked ballots, we will reach out and indicate that they should make it clear that anything to do with the election, the running of the election itself and the legislation, those questions need to be directed to the clerk's office and to the elections office and should not be answered by them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I have Councillor Morgan and Councillor Hopkins.
Sure. I'll comment on two items. One, the report, which I said this at committee, but given we're discussing it here, I want to compliment our staff on. I think aside from the changes related to ranked ballots, there are a significant number of process improvements and enhancements to the way that elections are going to be run. And I think they're all very positive enhancements that will show a better experience for voters. And I appreciate the commitment to continuous improvement on these as we go through elections. And, one of the things that I think is really positive is not only the enhancements of more tabulators, in fact, 55% more options to vote and more polling stations. But also, there's also recognizing the inflationary costs of a growing city in this report as well. And I think it was a very good report, and most of the questions that people have can be answered within it. I will, if the chair will allow me, make one comment on what Councillor Armstrong was talking about. I attended the session in question. I can tell you it was made incredibly clear that election information comes from the City of London's election office, and a citizens group called 123 London invited some people to come to town. They went to a number of cities as in conjunction with an Ontario-wide group, and they were discussing their experiences in different jurisdictions about ranked ballots. It was not about trying to tell people in London how to vote or run their election in any sort of way. It was sharing stories and experiences from other jurisdictions. But it was made very clear that election information comes from the City of London's election office, and that is the most appropriate place. And I know that they have a great number of public sessions planned throughout the summer to make sure the public gets the information they need to vote in the fall.
Councillor Hopkins, anyone else?
Thank you, Your Worship, and I just would like to speak to the ranked balloting and thank Councillor Armstrong for bringing up the questions of costs. And the reason we need to clarify that, and I think I want to thank staff for doing that this evening, is that there's a lot of misinformation out there with the public as to the costs. And so I think it was clarified this evening, so I thank you for that. The other question that I have, and I get a number of questions from residents about ranked balloting and what does it mean and how do we do it. And I think I did hear the clerk, but I would like to hear again from the clerk, what is the process when we are, when residents, constituents, the public reaches out to us and wants to know exactly what is ranked balloting and even make comments about ranked balloting. What is the process that we should be taking to give them that information?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, so if you receive an inquiry from a member of the public with respect to how ranked ballot vote works, we would appreciate it very much if those questions were then relayed to either me directly or through the elections office. We will respond to the question and copy the councillor so that they know that a response has been provided. Just ensure that it's consistent and factual information that's being given. And we are open to anyone, honestly, anyone who would like us to come and speak to them about ranked ballots, community groups, any organizations, we'd be happy to do that. As well, we would encourage them to go to the City of London's election web page, which has a number of matters on it that provide information on ranked ballots, as well as a video that shows how the ranked ballot operates.
Deputy Mayor Hubert, anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to clarify, what's the election date, Mr. Clerk?
It is October 22nd, and we will have a number of advance polls leading into the voting day.
I'm sure it's going to be exciting. And for those of you who may not have a meeting in your ward, you're welcome to come to the final Ward 8 community meeting where the clerk's department will be talking about ranked ballot. The clerk herself will be there, and you're welcome to come to that. I do have two questions quickly. Why is it that the cost per tabulator has increased so much? That was one thing that stood out to me, and perhaps you could provide some clarity on that.
Through Mr. Mayor, that's the cost of the vendors has given us per unit. As to why it's increased, we used a different vendor in 2014, and it's 4 years later.
I'm sure you negotiated for the best deal possible, but it's a sizable increase, and that's a big chunk of it. The second question that I have is really related to the response time in terms of the polls closing, and if they're in the contracts, there's any stipulation or estimation as to when the voting public will know what the result is on that date.
Through Mr. Mayor, that timing doesn't have a lot to do with the vendor. It has to do with us. So what will happen at the close of the poll, the poll supervisor will bring the tabulator and the ballot boxes back to City Hall. and then we will remove the sticks and start downloading the information. The only time the vendor would be involved in any delay is if there's an issue with the stick or the machine, but I can assure you we're going to be thoroughly testing those machines and the program leading into the election. With a ranked ballot, we cannot release any results until all of the votes have been counted. So we cannot release the results of round one until all of the votes have been counted. So we have to release it all at once. You won't be seeing, 400 polls out of 600 reporting it. It will be just, here's round one and here's the results. So we understand from the vendor that it's fairly quick to download the information. So we're still anticipating and hoping that we will have round one released by midnight. And then if there's a round two, it will likely be the next day because I'll be sending staff home to get a few hours of sleep before we do round two, because we don't want any errors being made as a result of people being exhausted.
Okay, I think it's really important that we understand what the expectations are going to be on that evening. And the most important thing, I said this when this came forward, is the integrity of the result. And that's our highest concern. So thank you for your answer.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'd also like to extend my gratitude to staff. So I read an article in the paper that seemed to give the impression that the ranked balloting was going to be much more expensive than we had expected, but in fact, it's actually maybe less expensive than we thought, so well done with that. Maybe a quick question about just your level of confidence in how this is going to go, because we certainly set the bar high for you in doing this. So before I continue, maybe just ask that.
First community out of 444 in Ontario to ever move forward with this in the country. How confident are you, Clerk Saunders, that this is going to work smoothly?
Well, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I'd like to thank Council for always giving me great challenges and opportunities. I'm confident that we'll be ready for the election on the 22nd. We're moving forward, and we'll be testing those machines thoroughly. So I'm confident we'll be fine.
Okay, that was fantastic news. Thank you very much. It was shortly after we had passed the motion, actually, I think maybe the next weekend, there was a hackathon, and I had built a ranked ballot simulator to pick polls and then use the algorithm to figure out who was the winners, just to demonstrate some of the various aspects of that. So somebody could experiment to see what happens. Is that something I should be taking down? Is that a concern for the election?
Your microphone.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, if we could have a conversation, that would be great. But yes, anything that would lead to any confusion about the City of London's ranked ballot and election coming up, I would prefer it be taken down, just so that there is absolutely no confusion about where to get the information about the ranked ballot.
Okay, thank you. So I'm happy to take that down, but we'll also have a conversation about it. Thank you very much.
Other speakers? Okay. Let's open the vote. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 13-0.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on. This is the fourth report of Civic Works, please.
Thank you very much. Your Worship, we had an extremely efficient meeting. We had some guests who attended our meeting to speak to items. I received no emails or phone calls. Staff have not indicated to me that anyone had any questions. Councillor Hopkins did have some questions on item 5, so I'm prepared to put the entire committee report on the floor and look to Councillor Hopkins to ask her question.
And any issues that need to be dealt with separately, I don't see anyone's hand. And Chair, also, I neglected to mention to you, I wanted to make a comment on 6, and I'll do that just before I call the question. Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and through you, and I want to thank the Chair for recognizing my question that I do have for staff. This is on number 5, the Colonel Talbot Pumping Station consulting fee increase, and because of all the development that is going on in the ward, this is a pumping station that's being built out on Colonel Talbot. It's starting, and it's being done in 3 stages. It's already started at Hulls Mills and going through the Springbank Park, and that's stage 1. My question through you, Your Worship, to staff is, do these increases cover stage 1, 2, and 3?
Mr. Soldo.
Thank you. Through Your Worship, these increases do cover all phases of this work.
Thank you for that, because I know it is going to be a long process and it's going to continue right into the summertime, so thank you.
Any other speakers? Okay, Chair, if I could, go ahead, Councillor Homer.
Just briefly on 3, 7, and 12. On 3, I know there's a consulting fee increase, but I certainly appreciate the questions at committee. This is one I can support. I think it makes sense in the long run to have the additional resource there to help commission that project and get it underway, and I'm glad to hear that the project's going well. On number 7, the commuter cycling program, again, this is the transfer payment agreement part of implementing the $3.3 million from the province for the North Branch connection in the Thames Valley Cycling Trail. That's an amazing infrastructure project. I'm glad it's not being delayed, and it's really important for active transportation in the city. And then on 12, the municipal class environmental assessment reform. I can tell you this is a hot topic at the Ontario Good Roads Association. I know that this resolution came to us through the Ontario Good Roads Association, and there was a session on this issue at the conference, which was earlier in February. And, it's a hot topic, and there's a number of things that need to be improved, especially how long it takes the province to respond when there's a Part 2 bump up, whether it's, 6 months, 8 months, sometimes a year. During that period when things are being reviewed, sometimes we're incurring additional costs, structures deteriorate even more than they were when we dealt with it. And certainly having an appeal process is very important. It's important for citizens to be able to appeal, but also having a timely response from the minister is also important. So I hope that leads to some improvements to the municipal class EA process.
Any other speakers? Okay, last week I had an opportunity to speak with Ms. Scher about Clause 6. That's the contract award. That's the tender for Dundas Place. And colleagues, I'll just say this from the chair, if that's all right. She reminded me just how hard Doug McRae and his team have been working on this project. He's been a really dedicated leader on the Dundas Place initiative. And Doug and his team have been incredibly strong at incorporating the diverse perspectives of what London's new Flex Street should look like. And they've come up with, I think, a really creative design. I also understand that London Hydro and many other partners have been really focused on getting this to the point that it's at now. So I just wanted to offer my thanks to Doug and his team from all of us tonight at Council. He's not here tonight. I am sure he's watching from home. Okay, with that, I'll call the question.
Closing the vote. Maybe.
Maybe.
The motion passed 13-0.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So, moving right along, we're into added reports. Pardon me. Yeah, you're right. So we've got the added reports. This is the CSC. I'll go to the chair.
I will put the only item on the floor. This is the debenture issuance. We had a special meeting to consider approval of $55 million in serial debentures. As you can see in the report, the rate was quite good. I will just point out a couple of things. This is, I think, the best spread we've ever received relative to the province of Ontario. So we measure the difference between our rates that we get and what the rates are for the province's debt, and the 17 basis points is very close. It's a very tight spread, and it's very good. Just to put it in dollar terms, you know, an estimate of savings of 3 basis points on this kind of offer probably saves $550,000 over 10 years. And it looks like we save probably closer to 5 basis points. So that's even more than $550,000 over 10 years. So it's quite important. It's a credit to our staff that we went to market when we did, and not just the staff, but also the folks on the financial markets side at CIBC who are helping us access those debt markets. So I just want to say credit to our staff and see if there are any questions.
Any speakers? I know I have Councillor Morgan. Anyone else?
Yes, I wanted to just echo some of what Councillor Hummer said, and on the importance of this and what an impressive feat it was. I think you don't need to know much about understanding how the debenture system works. All you need to know is that the people who invested in us, not only did they fulfill all of the offering, but the only complaints they had were that our yields were too low and our spreads were too tight, which is very good for the person in our position. And that means not only are people investing in us because of our AAA credit rating, but we're getting a very, very good rate, and on behalf of the citizens of London, and that's why Councillor Helmer mentioned the savings. And this goes back to be attributed to the fact that we do have a lot of fiscal discipline over many councils and many treasurers and many city managers to maintain our AAA credit rating, and this is one of the examples of where it really pays off. So kudos to our treasurer, her team, and the good folks at CIBC for their work on this particular debenture.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Any other speakers? Okay. Let's open that vote, please. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote. And the motion carries 13-0.
Just bear with us, colleagues. We're just working on the system and running the order. Okay. Just trying to predict the future there for a moment, and it proved to be quite difficult. We're going to deal with 9.1. This is the fifth public report of the council in closed session. I'll look to Deputy Mayor Hubert to report out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to report progress for the items for which we went in closed session.
Thank you. Deferred matters. There are none. Inquiries. I'm aware of one. Wow, okay. I have Councillor Morgan, Turner, Salih.
Well, I don't know if we're all the same inquiry, but I'll start. I've passed around a note. I don't know if my inquiry will lead to needing to go on camera for a subsequent inquiry, but I did want to inquire of our staff about some recent bylaw enforcement activities in the past week. I certainly understand that when matters are before the court, we have restrictions under the memorandum we have with the province to run the provincial offences court, that there is not to be any sort of political interference, and I wouldn't expect us to participate in that. That being said, I don't know if our city solicitor can comment on what information is and allowed to be available to us, and if Mr. Kosovis can comment on what is the normal practice that we would follow in enforcing the Vehicles for Hire bylaw, and maybe subsequent to that, to Mr. Card, is there any information that council is able to further get about this matter in camera that we can't get in public session?
Mr. Hayward.
Through the chair, I'd just like to speak to this issue first, because this has been a very contentious issue, and I've got to admit, from our end. It's something that has been very difficult to deal with over the last week. So there was an article that appeared in the newspaper last Sunday or Monday, and it ignited a real steady backlash against the City of London and against our bylaw enforcement team. And while we're not able to comment publicly on specific charges, I can assure you that our general approach is that if we receive complaints, we investigate those complaints, and if valid, then we issue warnings, and then we work to inform and educate people about our bylaws before we move to fines, and I'll emphasize before we move to fines. One of the things that I will say is the person who is at the center of the story has now confirmed that she did receive warnings, and that when she was warned, the vehicle had been hired to take someone from the mall to an office, and that was, there's in a newspaper article on Thursday, and is also mentioned on the radio, I believe. In general, if it is as simple as someone providing rides to people in our community who are struggling to make arrangements for transportation to and from medical appointments, they would not receive a ticket. I need to be clear on this. If the situation was as stated in the Free Press article, such an individual would not receive a ticket, the original Free Press article. While it has also been characterized as a sting operation, I want to make it clear that in cases involving the vehicle for hire industry, we are often responding to a complaint or complaints from the public. And when we receive those complaints, our obligation is to ensure we are enforcing our city's bylaws. There's a bylaws that come through council, there's a bylaws that come through a public process and have received that process. So, in terms of the vehicle for hire industry, this is one that is regulated, and for good reason. We want to protect both the drivers and passengers in those vehicles. It's a business, and the regulations ensure that, for example, proper commercial insurance is in place. It ensures that police record checks are undertaken and that the vehicles are safe to drive. We don't want drivers or passengers put at risk. And finally, I'd be remiss not to speak about the barrage of negative attention that our bylaw manager and team have been subjected to over the last week. These attacks have not only been unwarranted, but unfair. They were based on an article that did not have all the facts. I can assure you that our bylaw team is dedicated to serving this community, and quite frankly, they were doing their job in addressing an unlicensed vehicle for hire. And I need to make that statement very strongly. So I'd pass it over to Mr. Card.
Your Worship, there are two aspects of the enforcement process that reside in different parts of the corporation. The investigations are done by Mr. Kotsova's area, and those result in charges that are lodged with the Provincial Offences Court. And I'm responsible for the administration of the Provincial Offences Court. Under the Memorandum of Understanding with the province, we have a number of obligations to maintain confidentiality and to keep specific matters essentially away from the council so that there isn't any suggestion that there is council interference in those prosecution activities. So for those reasons, we don't speak about matters that are before the courts. I mean, there are many reasons not to, but we don't speak about matters that are before the courts. Now, in this case, because of the controversy that arose, as Mr. Hayward has indicated, I did ask that certain information be provided to me so that I could be satisfied that the activities of staff were in compliance with legal requirements. For example, there was initially a suggestion that there was some kind of entrapment, and so I requested information to ensure that that was not the case. There were other allegations about, for example, whether or not the activities might have amounted to a business, whether there was any jurisdiction at all. And again, I've looked into those things. I could provide the council with more details about my opinions in camera, but in public session, I would advise you that the activities have been reviewed. In my opinion, they were found to conform with all requirements that have been imposed on us, and they were proper. So is that sufficient for the councillor's purposes? Thank you, Your Worship.
Yes, I want to thank both our city manager and our city solicitor for responding to the question. I know there was a lot of questions in the public this week, and also echo Mr. Hayward's support for the work that our bylaw team does. It's certainly not easy work. They certainly are the ones who are on the front lines and face a lot of the flack and the criticism for the work that they do, but they do good work, and I'm glad to hear that Mr. Card has ensured that that the good work continues in a very appropriate way according to our policies and bylaws. Given the responses in the public, I certainly don't see any need to move into camera myself on this. I think that the answers were very sufficient and addressed the things, and I certainly don't want to get into moving into an area that would be counter to our obligations under the memorandum of agreement with the province. So, so thank you for the responses to my questions today.
Okay, so just as we're working our way through the inquiries, we have Councillor Turner and Salee. Was it on this topic? Okay, and Councillor Hopkins, is it on this topic? I'm going to go to you now.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to staff for your response. I know we have heard a lot from the public, and I know the work that the bylaw enforcers have done. I have heard from a resident who would like me to see if I can ask a question about our vehicle for hire bylaw. And my question through you, Your Worship, I'll ask the question, is in regards to the vehicle for hire bylaw, under what circumstances in the bylaw can an individual provide transportation? And following that, what are the exceptions to that through you, Your Worship?
Through your worship, so the vehicle for hire bylaw is really to regulate trips from a point, from various points in the city. It's a citywide bylaw. It doesn't pertain to things like rideshare, where you are grouping as a series of individuals going to a common place, once there, once back. Is more the bylaw is more applicable to multiple trips, multiple destinations, and obtaining remuneration for that service. So it's a different set of circumstances. In terms of the compassion or care services, there is a provision in our bylaw, and I believe it was Part 3. I'm just going by memory, but it was Part 3G, where we do have provisions for nonprofits or other registered agencies where they provide transportation services for elderly, for continuum of care type of facilities, where there's private arrangements. They typically manage themselves in terms of obtaining their own insurance, their own safeties, and ensuring that their drivers are screened as well. But we don't get involved in those. What typically happens from our standpoint is we'll get an application. It's not even really an application, it's more of an inquiry as to what their business model is, and we will respond accordingly in that if you're more of a compassion services, the bylaw would not apply to you.
Thank you for that response. I think there be people in the public that are interested in understanding the bylaw and how it works. So thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Mr. Hayward, you're trying to get my attention?
Through the chair, yes. I'd like it if we could go in camera for a personnel matter.
That's good enough for me. Deputy Mayor Hubert?
I thank my colleague for the question and the clarification around compassion services. And Mr. Mayor, if there's an opportunity, perhaps through Ms. Daters-Bears, for us to highlight those services, provide some of that information that we may have from the community about where people can go to find those services. So I'm thinking of organizations like Meals on Wheels or the Cancer Society. And so I think to some degree, Mr. Mayor, some of the discontinuity that happened this week in the media was people not being aware that there were services, good organizations that provided protection through insurances for people to ensure that people can get there. And so, Ms. Daters-Bears, would that be a possibility? Can we highlight that some way through your department? Perhaps we can put it on the city website and maybe liaison with our major hospitals and institutions in that respect as well.
Through the chair, thank you very much for the question, and certainly we can highlight it. We can certainly highlight that we have a number of resources, including a book that's called Helping Yourself Through Hard Times. We have that, and I think council members are aware of it. It's a small booklet that we can provide, but certainly take the recommendation back and provide information to council and to members of the public as well.
Okay, we are in the midst of inquiries, but anything on this specific issue? Councillor Zafman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I know that Councillor Morgan and I, we had discussed earlier that if there was a need to go into camera, that we had a motion prepared if that was necessary. And hearing from staff, I think that might be a benefit. So I think that motion is in front, I believe, in front of everyone here. So if we can proceed with that before any other inquiries or what the process might be, but that would where I'd like to direct this.
Yeah, it's an interesting meeting tonight. We've got a lot of inquiries. I think just to keep the conversation going and to stay focused, let's go in camera now, if that's the will of council. And then once we've finished that closed session portion of the meeting, we'll come back and we'll deal with the other inquiries. So is that moved by you, Councillor Zafman? And I'd look for a seconder as well.
I'm not speaking.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Cassidy. And I'll start a speakers list. Councillor Squire.
I am urging council not to go in camera on this matter. We have a particular political role to play, which is to delegate the authority to deal with these particular issues to staff. And in public session, we have been assured that this was done properly. I certainly will not be going in public to hear more information about this matter. From my point of view, it's a dangerous precedent to say, okay, staff, you've done your job, you've investigated something, and now we'd like to go in camera to talk to you about it. That's not something I'm going to participate in. I also have been alerted that I have another role to play in this matter for which I will be interviewed tomorrow, and I do not want to prejudice that interview. I'm talking about a police interview, and I do not want to prejudice that process by going in camera.
Okay, Councillor Helmer.
It would be helpful for me and perhaps for everyone else if we could just clarify the reason, specific reason that we're going in camera.
I've heard from Mr. Hayward personnel matter, and I'm also looking for comments from Mr. Card. So why don't we start with you, Mr. Hayward? And Mr. Card, some concerns have been raised through this process about going in camera, looking for just your opinion on that as well, your advice on that as well.
So through your worship, this is something that I would like to discuss with you, and it is specifically related to personnel issues. It is not related to the processes that we've discussed publicly. So I want to assure council of that, but obviously there is a relation there, but it's not going into the processes side. It's just dealing with some of the personnel matters.
Mr. Card?
Your worship, my presence would be to provide a legal basis for the proposal that Mr. Hayward will be speaking to. It's not to explain or elaborate on any of the activities that have occurred this week.
Councillor Helmer? Councillor Salee?
Mr. Chair, just out of procedural, I think we should, I'm fine with it if it comes up during emergent motions. I think we have to technically finish inquiries, and then this would be an emergent motion, I think. I don't think this would be an inquiry.
So we're on inquiries right now. What we're going to do is we're going to hit pause, deal with this because we're on a specific portion. I talked to the clerk about that. She's comfortable with that as well. Yeah. Councillor Hopkins?
I just would like clarification because I did hear what Councillor Squire did have to say, and I've heard what staff have had to say. So as long as this inquiry go in camera is just for a personal matter, I am supportive of that. But if I support this inquiry from Councillor Zafman, it is different to what we're going to be going in camera. So I would like clarification. Do we have to defeat this inquiry or not support it, or just go in with a new inquiry on a personal matter
So
only?
with inquiries, we typically wouldn't go in camera to receive advice. There typically wouldn't be a motion. It's just a questions asked and a questions answered. This is a situation where the city manager has indicated that he has information he'd like to share with us. He's recommending that we go in camera. So what I would do at this point is just ask for leave, and we'd grant leave. Should that be granted, then we can go in camera and get the information that Mr. Hayward wants to share. Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Your Worship, and just through you to our city manager, is this timely information that you're hoping to share with us?
This is a recommendation that I want to bring before you. I don't want to go into any more detail on it until we go in camera, and then we can discuss it there, but it is timely.
Okay, thank you, that was helpful.
Okay, so let's deal with that motion for leave first. I'll look for a mover. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Armstrong.
Just turned off my computer. Oh, it's back. Your Worship, I'm just wondering, can we not deal with the rest of the inquiries? And
We can
then
do
go
it
in-
one way or the other, Councillor.
Because
The
we're
most
gonna go in
efficient
there
way
and come
would
back.
just to deal with this, get this answer, and then move on. Or we can talk about it for a while and decide to do it a different way. But
No, I'm just thinking, because you've done this before, Your Worship, that when we go in camera, that we don't, when we come out of camera, it's in that room rather than
We'll
there.
report-
But that's,
We'll report progress and we'll move on. Okay. Okay, so looking for a motion for leave, please. So we can move in camera at this time. Moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Zaifman. Okay, on leave only, that'll come up on screen.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 11-2.
Okay, then on the main motion, to go into closed session, and I'll ask the clerk to read out the reasons, please.
It's a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications, reports, advice, or recommendations of officers and employees of the corporation necessary for that purpose, and directions to officers and employees of the corporation pertaining to bylaw enforcement matters with respect to city vehicles for hire bylaw L 130-71.
Thank you very much. Any discussion? Councillor Ridley.
Thank you. Now I will enter into discussion on this because our process that we followed in the past 15 minutes made this extraordinarily unclear. So two of my colleagues passed out a potential motion that they wanted to make, which I heard the colleague who had signed it say, I'm no longer interested in making that motion. Next, what I heard was Mr. Hayward indicate that he wished to go in camera regarding a personnel matter and not a personal matter. And then the next thing was the motion that was read was the motion that one of the signatories said they no longer wanted to make. So I have absolutely no concerns about going into camera to hear from Mr. Hayward on a personnel matter, but I want confirmation that it's not the matter which the mover, the signatory withdrew, but rather we're referencing a personnel matter that both Mr. Hayward and Mr. Card are comfortable with us going in camera for.
Let's ask the city clerk to clarify. I think it's a matter of terms and that have different definitions in different acts, and there's a reason why the word personal was used in this motion. Ms. Saunders?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, we're quoting directly from the Municipal Act, and the term used in the Municipal Act is personal matters, not personnel. So that's why the word is, but it's the same thing. It's just technically what the Act says.
And thank you. So then I think my question, it goes back to Mr. Hayward for more clarity, because the motion in front of us was one that the signatory indicated that they would not be moving. So Mr. Hayward, I don't believe that you wanted to speak to the potential motion, but rather you had another item that you wanted us to speak to. So is it still related to the motion that's on the screen, or I just need confirmation here?
So through the chair, the item that I want to speak to you about is something specific. It would fit under that definition. It may not be the same issue that the mover and the seconder wanted to bring forward, but it is something very specific and timely.
Other speakers? Let's call the question.
Closing the vote. And the motion carries 12-1.
Okay, colleagues, let's go to committee room 3. Members attending the meeting, anyone watching from home, it's difficult to predict how long we'll be in camera, so stay tuned. Thank you very much. We'll get out as soon as we can. Okay, we're back in public session. It's 7:15. We're about 45 minutes past the dinner break. We have, I think, what will be a short amount of agenda items. And so I'm just looking around for some consensus. Do people feel they need a nutrition break, or do you think we can get through these last couple of items? Okay, let's do that first then. So we have two additional, well, first, I guess we should report out. And so Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just report progress on the item that we went in camera for.
Okay, second, we have an inquiry from Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to speak with regard to the rising river levels in the Thames over the past week or last week. First, I'd like to compliment staff and the Upper Thames Conservation Authority and everyone for the work that was done in terms of protecting our city. It certainly gave validation to the mitigative and protective measures that we have in place, including the West London Weir and Dike, as well as the Fanshawe Dam, which have done an amazing job. Also with respect to the reporting and updates that we received and the public received throughout the process. I think it certainly outlines the need for us to make sure that we don't develop on floodplains. But the second part is that it brought some questions to me, specifically with respect to our vulnerabilities with key infrastructure. And those two pieces that I was thinking of specifically, but perhaps in a more general basis, was with respect to Greenway pollution control plant and our other pollution control plants, but Greenway being low-lying. As I went through the Greenway and the Terry Fox Parkway, I noticed how close the water levels were to encroaching upon the Greenway pollution control plant. The second was that that there were overland flows over the back lot of Hydro, London Hydro, and that was pretty much entirely submerged. A lot of equipment is stored there. I wondered what our vulnerabilities from an environmental perspective were there as well. And so if through you, perhaps to the engineer.
Mr. Soldo.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did reach out to Mr. Mathers, the Director of Water and Wastewater, prior to coming here tonight. I knew this was on the agenda. So I'll try to address both. In terms of the Greenway pollution control plant, the river waters did impact the operations of the plant itself. During the flooding event, the high water levels submerged the treatment plant's effluent pipe and limited the ability of water to leave the plant. This bottleneck limited the plant's ability to fully treat to its normal design levels. The city is looking at possible solutions to that. To prevent this, a pumping station would be needed to be constructed there to pump into the Thames River during large events. And in worst case scenarios, the Thames River could also overtop its banks and potentially flood into the plant itself. This would cause obviously potential damage to the building and equipment. So in order to reduce these risks, the city is looking at potentially building berms that are being constructed around the plant. Currently, we are doing that at the Vauxhall plant, and it's in our plan for both Greenway as well as for Adelaide. It's been identified, and it's just subject to future funding from the CWWF fund or the Green Infrastructure Fund. In terms of the London Hydro property itself, we did reach out to London Hydro and had discussions with them. I can say that the area that was flooded there along the Thames River was previously remediated and capped by London Hydro. So in terms of environmental concerns, there was no damage to this cap during the flooding event. It's currently used as a storage area, and no equipment that would be considered hazardous is actually stored in that area.
That's for you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Mr. Soldo. I appreciate that, and especially with respect to the hardening and mitigation measures that we might need to take in the future. I think it's important that Council keep a mind to that, and that if there are other vulnerabilities that the municipality has with respect to infrastructure that we need to harden a little bit further, given the level of water that we saw. I had the opportunity to attend a meeting with the Upper Thames and get a full sense of where we were and what the level of impact was. So I think this is very helpful, and I appreciate the response.
Thank you. If I could just add a compliment, that I was in the EOC for a good portion of the operation, and what I saw was people that had been there working through the night. I saw staff coming together, very calm, very cool, very collected, and also working with our community partners very, very well. And the communication that was occurring between emergency services, city staff, other community partners was very solid. And like you said, Councillor Turner, that could have been a very serious situation. And in part, it was less of a serious situation because of the work of our staff, the proactive work of our staff. And it could have continued for days because more rain was forecasted in the weekend to come. So terrific work by everyone. And thanks for the questions, Councillor Turner. Okay, Councillor Hopkins, on this subject? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me just to speak for a minute, because I want to thank Councillor Turner for bringing up the concerns in the community. Sitting on Upper Thames, we found that this 2018 flood, there was flooding in municipalities, other areas, even in London, where we've never seen flooding before. So it was really a wake-up call to not only climate change, but the need, and it made me realize the importance of the Conservation Authority, especially when it comes to the dam, Fanshawe Dam, and how it does protect the City of London. And it's usually done when you don't see the problems, you know they're doing their job. So I really want to remind Council the importance of our authority to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, and I have Councillor Salee now.
My brief inquiry is to staff. I had residents just stress the need to know exactly when the upcoming rapid transit discussions will be. I believe when I asked staff, I think they were saying possibly April 9th and 10th would be those dates, but I just wanted for the public to have that opportunity to hear from staff as well, because it's an important conversation, of course.
Mr. Soldo.
Thank you, through your worship. It is anticipated that staff will be bringing back a report in early April. I believe it's April 9th to Strategic Priorities Committee related to the Rapid Transit Initiative.
Thank you. So I just want to just reiterate that. So April 9th, just so because I know I had many people ask me before that they want to be able to schedule their lives around that. So I guess it's safe to say that that's the, and I guess staff will also communicate that that's the anticipated date. So members of the public from now have as much communication. So I just want us to push that out from now.
Thank you. Any other inquiries? Okay, let's keep moving. Emergent motions? There are none. Bylaws. So, do we have any conflicts on the bylaws?
Oh, sorry, no conflicts. My apologies. It was just to be pulled was 115.
Okay, and a reminder that Bill 115 was revised.
And there's an.
And also, we'll deal with the added at this time as well. That was related to the debentures. Councillor Helmer.
I'm just moving them.
So, moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. We'll come up on screen in a minute. This is first reading. We're voting.
Closing the vote.
Right? Move it.
Councillor Morgan?
Who?
No, sorry, closing the vote.
Moving it?
Try now.
She's got to get to the agenda item. I forgot that at the beginning of the meeting.
Closing the vote.
Just wait till we report out.
And the motion carries 10-0.
Councillor Helmer, this is second reading.
Yeah, just move second reading.
Moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Turner. Okay, any discussion? Let's call the question.
Closing the vote. And the motion carries 10-0.
And third reading, moved by Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. I'll call the question.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 10-0.
Okay, the system worked. Congratulations and many, many thanks to... We have to do revised. Okay, so we'll do... Oh, okay. I think what you heard was 115 to be pulled. It wasn't to be pulled. It was indicating that it had been revised. But it sounds like... Okay. Okay, okay. I think it's what I didn't hear out of my left ear. So this is on 115. It was pulled and moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Turner. Now's your chance. First reading, Councillor Van Holst.
Nice try.
Let's call the question. Okay, we're voting.
Closing the vote.
Okay, second.
No, I'm not yet. Councillor Hopkins?
I haven't,
Current item.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 7-4.
Okay, second reading, 115. Councillor Cassidy, moving it. Are you speaking this as well? Let's just get a seconder. Seconded by, thank you, Councillor Ridley. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say, I know there was some disagreement on the fine details of this, of the bylaw, but I just want to say again what a great development this is in Ward 5, and I'm happy to see it moving forward. It's been a long time coming.
Any other speakers to 115? Councillor Van Holst?
Yes, I'll thank the councillor for a lot of work on this one, and we have a lot of policies, but I do like that the policy that in the end we get to make the decision, and I think it was a good one. I hope this moves forward quickly and we see some more development happening.
Thank you. Other speakers? There are none. Let's call the question. Second reading. We're voting.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 7-3.
And third reading, looking for a mover, please. Moved by Councillor. Looking for a mover. Thank you, Councillor Cassidy. Seconded by. Third reading, please. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hubert. All those in favor, we'll call the question. Open the vote. And we're voting.
Closing the vote. And the motion passes 7-3.
Okay, now just before I ask for a vote to adjourn, I would like to thank the clerk staff for working on this project. We have a new voting system, a new agenda system. I'm sure it was a great deal of front-end work to get us to where we are, and we've just used it successfully for the first council meeting. So to Ms. Westlake Power and to everyone else involved, thank you very much.
And IT staff.
Oh my goodness, how could I forget IT?
IT staff.
Yeah, they make the world turn. So thank you to IT staff as well. Okay, everybody, let's look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Cassidy, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Have a great night.